This is Forever Faithful, Part 6 of the Hope for the Holidays series, written by Michele Pollock Dalton, narrated by Rick Barr, published by Barr 26 Publishing, LLC. Copyright 2021 by Michele Pollock Dalton. Production copyright 2023 by Michele Pollock Dalton. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. Agony shot through him when the nurse's aide helped Charlie Mary roll to his side, and he still couldn't shake the embarrassment of having two young women attend to his most basic needs. When his bare backside met the cold metal of the bedpan, the resigned man grimaced at the lightning bolt of pain the chill caused, and he inadvertently yelped his displeasure. One of the young women attending him rolled her eyes while the other muttered disparaging comments about old people. Aggravated by the demeaning discussion the women quietly carried on about him, in his presence, Charlie's jaw tightened, and he silently castigated them for their mean-spirited ignorance as he ground his teeth together. The staff whispered in the corner as they picked up discarded linens, but as soon as Charlie called, "I'm done," the pair rushed away and left him sitting atop the smelly bedpan. After 10 minutes, Charlie hit the call button and waited for the brash young women to return. Laying at such an odd angle caused his broken back to screech in misery, and every slight movement he made dislodged the contents of the container under his sore bottom, until he was left laying in a cesspool of his own filth. Hurting and humiliated, the defeated man suffered through another bedding change and a quick wipe down when someone returned to assist him an hour later. But by then, Charlie was ready to scream profanities at the inefficient and inadequate staff. "Lord," his mind shouted, "get me out of here!" Initially, moving from the hospital to the rehab center seemed the best course of action, but as the afternoon turned to evening, Charlie wholeheartedly regretted the noble action. His wife, Ruth, insisted she could care for him at home while he recuperated from the unexpected fall that caused spinal fractures in his lumbar region. But, stubborn man that he was, Charlie insisted it wasn't the best financial decision. Although the orchard on their property was done producing, their busiest time of the year was just ahead on the Christmas Tree Farm. And with a high-profile order from the prestigious Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, it was inconceivable that Ruth could manage to care for him and their family business. Still, as he prodded the gelatinous goo the dietary aide shoved onto his tray table earlier, the worried man wondered what the next 4 to 6 weeks would hold. On the other side of the privacy curtain, his roommate hacked until he vomited, and the rancid scent of recycled goo made Charlie gag. "You okay over there?" he questioned as the other man continued to cough. It was nearly time for the shift change before someone arrived to take away the dinner trays and clean up his unfortunate neighbor. But by that point, Charlie's patience and pain medication had worn off, and his foul mood was on full display. Just like his darn backside. Chapter 2. The light over his hospital bed burst into life during the dead of night, and Charlie's eyes blinked open. "What is it?" he groggily asked as a beleaguered woman struggled to get a wheeled contraption lined up under his bed. Every time the girl tried to ram the conveyance into place, it jolted the older man's broken body until he pleaded, "Stop! I gotta get baths done before the day shift gets here," the chit snapped in frustration. "So let's just get this over with." "What is that thing?" the patient asked in dread as it rattled the bed frame again. "Never mind. Just roll over so I can get this harness under you." "Roll over? My back is broken," Charlie stammered. "The day nurse gave me a sponge bath. She didn't need that thing," he exclaimed, pointing to the strange sling. "Listen, whoever you are, I have to get the baths done that day shift didn't before the DON gets here later this morning. And since I'm the only one on this unit tonight, I don't have help to move you, so we have to use the Hoyer." Anxious about the woman's insistence and leery of her mumbled directions, Charlie submitted to being shifted and shoved until the bit of blue cloth was wadded up under his torso. But he yelped in fear and pain when the lift torqued him out of the bed. Then something shifted, and the horrified man began to list to one side as the canvas harness slipped past his center of gravity. Displaced, he was twisted onto his side, and then Charlie lurched as the weight of his upper body carried him onto the hard tile floor. Charlie's head clipped the nightstand as he fell, and his momentum shifted. His body slumped into a V shape, and he was left hanging for just a moment before the pendulum stopped swinging. Then his backside smashed to the floor, a shriek of agony exploding from his bloodied mouth before his vision went black. The next several weeks slipped past in a medicated haze as Charlie recovered from the surgery required to repair his spine after the fateful accident. And when he returned to the rehabilitation center from the hospital, the facility was in a constant state of chaos. Staff shortages, new government mandates, and the challenge of implementing new medical protocols to limit the spread of disease strained already limited resources. So, as Thanksgiving approached, Charlie silently recited every Bible verse he had committed to memory. The lyrics to his favorite Christian songs and hymns flittered through his mind even as he slept, and the sequestered man whispered all his fears, frustrations, and fervent desires for healing into the darkness. And even then, his patience was stretched thin, along with his tolerance for the cruelty displayed toward the patients and their worried families. However, the aching loneliness and the unescapable angst about the future clawed at his determination to trust God. "Though he will slay me, yet will I trust him," he whispered to the ceiling in the wee hours. And as he waited for his pain medicine to arrive, Charlie started to pray. "I don't understand what you're doing here, or why you've put me in this place. I've tried to serve you and follow your guidance, yet here I am, unable to move. Ruthie's all alone, and the business I've spent my whole life building. What am I supposed to do from this bed, God? Are you listening?" After falling into a restless sleep, Charlie dreamt of a blinding whiteness, an empty space devoid of life, and it horrified him. The vacuum of uselessness and aimless nothingness more terrifying than any nightmare he'd ever experienced. Chapter 3. Groggy and still haunted by his dream the night before, Charlie wasn't fully cognizant when his terrified wife called the next afternoon. "What is it?" he asked, trying to break through the sound of Ruth's hysterical sobs. "Stacy," she wailed. "We found her after church today." Cold dread filled Charlie's stomach. He remembered bits of a phone conversation shortly after his fall, and his stepdaughter's emotional state was a cause of great concern. "Is she—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice the terrible thought. "The paramedics were able to revive her, but I'm waiting outside the hospital now to find out." "Find out?" Ruth's voice caught, cracked, and dissolved into a breathy wail. "I need you, Brownie." His pet name sounded less like an endearment on his wife's lips and more like a child's plea, and Charlie's heart stuttered. His angel was a strong woman, well used to depending on herself. In fact, earning her trust in the early stages of their courtship was a challenge that almost destroyed their fledgling relationship. "Ruth, we have to trust God with this. There's no other recourse," he softly consoled, aware of how hypocritical that was, considering his own state of mind. Yet Charlie knew the advice was sound. There wasn't anything they could do to bring Stacy back from the brink, and there was even less he could accomplish with his broken body and fractured faith. Disgruntled by her husband's seeming indifference to the desperate situation, Ruth rasped, "I need to go. I don't want to miss a call from the emergency room physician." And without giving her man a chance to reply, the frightened woman disconnected. Lifting the phone away from his ear, Charlie hit the disconnect button and immediately began to pray. Whispered grunts and grumbles that unleashed all of the built-up fury sitting behind his breastbone. Yet, even for all of his angry thoughts, there was still an unrelenting assurance that everything would work out. Somehow, some way, there was an answer he couldn't quite conceive. For the next several days, Charlie's conversations with Ruth were perfunctory as they struggled to pray over their daughter's medical treatment and state of mind. But Charlie couldn't bring himself to share the apprehension that lingered, especially as his first physical therapy session loomed ever closer. Ruth called in tears the evening Stacy returned home from the psychiatric ward.
She refuses to speak or engage in any way. The paramedics might have saved her life, but Stacy is nothing but an empty shell.
Stonewalled by his inability to comfort his sweet lady, Charlie let his wife talk through all the debilitating emotions she struggled to contain. And the broken man murmured whatever comfort he could think of when she paused for breath. "I'm sorry I'm not there to help you through this, Angel, but I sure want to be." He sighed as the conversation settled into an exhausted silence.
"It's selfish for me to wish the same thing when you're already dealing with so much,"
Ruth raggedly admitted.
"I've just gotten so used to feeling your arms around me when I'm overwhelmed. Without you here, I feel like the whole world is falling apart."
Struggling to clear the lump from his throat, Charlie agreed. "You keep me going too, Angel. This is a mighty lonely place without you here."
"Well, it's cruel what they're doing to us, locking me out, keeping us apart,"
Ruth hissed, unhappy with the bureaucratic overreach endangered by the worldwide lockdown.
"Tomorrow might be Thanksgiving, but I'm struggling to find any gratefulness in my heart."
His thoughts agreed, yet Charlie couldn't bring himself to speak the words. A small part of him still believed in a positive outcome, no matter what he could see, hear, or feel. Chapter 4. Day after Thanksgiving. He wasn't embarrassed, not in the least. Tears fell freely, and great big gulping breaths kept him from speaking. "I'd say we all have something to be thankful for after all," he boomed. Ruth wiped the moisture from her eyes and agreed. Her daughter's change of heart early that morning left the appreciative mother in awe. God was forever faithful, and Stacy was a living testament to his goodness. As Ruth handed off the phone, Charlie's shocked gaze took in the daughter he'd inherited when he married 3 years earlier. Stacy's eyes were bright, her smile a bit timid, and her shoulders straight. And Charlie Mary knew he was looking at a miracle. Gone was the scowling, angry woman locked in abject misery and suicidal despondency. Instead, the light of the world shone brightly from the broken shell, and the specter of death was banished. "Well, hey there, Bunny. You're a beautiful sight."
"Bunny?"
Stacy giggled. Giggled. The girl actually giggled, and Charlie's laughter boomed. Yep," he replied with a devil-may-care grin. "First time I met you, you were quite offended by the term honey."
"Bee poop? You're still trying to call me bee poop? That's just gross,"
Stacy teased, her spirits soaring. Relieved from the weight of her shame, the woman offered her stepfather a radiant smile. "Well now, hold on there, young lady. Seems to me I called you Bunny, not Honey. And for just that reason," he stated, blue eyes twinkling with mischief.
"I see. Well, as long as it isn't a reference to my cute tail, then we won't have a problem."
"Stacy," Ruth admonished in the background, her laughter compounding Stacy's glee. Charlie let loose a wild guffaw that startled his roommate awake. The dusty old codger yelped, "Who's there?" And the happy father had to apologize for his boisterous behavior. "Just got some amazing news, Will. That's all. I'll try to keep it down." A frantic call on Saturday brought his family's celebratory mood to an end. "Calm down, Angel," Charlie begged as Ruth wept.
"I don't understand what's happening. Why is everything suddenly falling apart?"
Ruth sniffled. The mystified man wouldn't dare formulate an answer, but as he listened to his wife explain the call from her youngest son, Charlie grit his teeth. Derek, the youngest of the twins, was in jail and asking Ruth for bail money. And Charlie cringed when his bitter thoughts burst out. "Ruth, that boy got himself into this mess, and he'll need to reap the consequences." With such circumstances circling, Charlie chatted with his wife and daughter multiple times that day and the next. While their conversation and prayers worked to alleviate some of the strain, a spirit of fear seeped back into his mind by Sunday afternoon.
"You've gone quiet, Brownie.
"What's wrong?" Ruth asked after supper. Releasing a careworn sigh, Charlie admitted, "Physical therapy starts tomorrow, and I don't know what they expect me to do. I don't really trust these folks. You know what I mean?"
"You're worried about falling again?"
"Yeah, that and more. We're dealing with more than broken bones now, Ruth. The plates, pins, and rods in my back aren't going to take much jostling. And if I'm honest, it just feels like another accident waiting to happen."
"Oh, I wish I could be there with you to cheer you on and keep an eye on the staff. Even though they fired the woman who dropped you, I still worry about you being there."
"You and Stacy have enough to handle with the Christmas rush, Angel. So, as much as I want to be home, I know it isn't a reasonable answer for many different reasons. Still, we'll keep praying that God makes a way." Charlie sighed, holding tightly to the gossamer strands of his faith. Chapter 5. Matt Pollan slid the rest of his paperwork across the desk and smiled at the Human Resources Director. Then he remembered the infernal mask that hid the lower half of his face and cheerfully said, "All set." The brusque woman nodded and jogged the various forms into a neat pile. "It's been a while since we had an on-site therapist. We've had one on loan from the hospital for the last 3 months, but his schedule's been so sporadic lately that several residents haven't even begun their therapy." Leading him from the office, his guide introduced Matt to each resident on his schedule and gave him a quick rundown on each person. As they approached the last room on the unit, the HR director paused and drew him aside. "Mr. Mary is a special case. His original back injury was a month ago, but shortly after he arrived at the facility, he was dropped from a Hoyer lift. The fall caused spinal instability that required a surgical repair, but there's an extraordinary liability issue here." Slate blue eyes widening, Matt cocked his head toward the closed door and questioned, "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" "Just use extra care, Mr. Pollins. This facility is already under review for the incident, and you need to be aware that there will be additional medical oversight during Mr. Mary's stay. We aim to eliminate as much culpability for the added injury as possible. Charlie's long-term prognosis will likely be the basis of a lawsuit against the facility. So let's do everything possible to ensure he leaves here in good shape." Suddenly thankful for the face mask that hid his expression, Matt nodded. But he had the unshakable feeling that he was being set up as a scapegoat for Mr. Charlie Mary's condition. "Good morning, sir," Matt greeted an hour later. While he'd been briefly introduced to the other residents in passing, Matt had wanted to be better prepared for his first meeting with Charlie Mary. The man in question shifted his glance from the ceiling to the man at his bedside. "I'm Matt Pollins, and I'll be working with you for the next several months on your rehabilitation. Sounds like you had a couple of nasty falls." Locking eyes with the man, Charlie swallowed back his fear and answered, "Yeah, that's about the sum of it." Edging his backside onto the window ledge, Matt assumed a relaxed position to observe how the man currently moved. And what he saw discouraged him. Aside from head movement, Mr. Charlie Mary was still, at least until the cell phone on his chest vibrated. Then the middle-aged man lifted one hand to look at the screen. "Here, let's sit you up just a little bit," Matt offered. "Doctor told me to stay still if there was pain," Charlie objected. "Well, some discomfort is to be expected, Mr. Mary. It's part of the healing process. And you've been laying flat for quite a while now. So the muscles in your back will be tight until we get you moving a little more," the therapist explained as he slowly moved the head position of the bed up a notch. "Doing okay?" he questioned when the older man gasped. "Dizzy," Charlie mumbled, closing his eyes and willing away the nausea that climbed up the back of his throat. "Give your equilibrium some time to adapt," Matt quietly advised. "Let's see if you can manage 5 minutes in this position, but let me know if it's too much, okay?" Chapter 6. Each time the new physical therapist entered his room that day, Charlie gulped back his fear. The first visit lasted 5 minutes, and the injured man survived without casting up his accounts. When Matt arrived again an hour later, Charlie's eyes widened in surprise.
We already did therapy, he grumbled. Pushing a lock of dark wavy hair off his forehead, Matt eyed his patient and smirked at the man's disgruntled tone. We're going to be good friends before this is all said and done, Mr. Mary. I'll stop by every hour or so today. That way, you can spend a little time sitting up. Resigned to the overzealous man's visits, Charlie yelped a quick SOS to the creator of the universe and did his time. However, when his nemesis arrived shortly after lunch for their fourth visit of the day, the irritable fellow acknowledged that the dizziness was more manageable. Hey, that's fabulous news, Matt exclaimed, handing back the resident's cell phone. You missed a call from Stacy while you were up, but I'm willing to bet she'll be happy to hear that you're off to a great start. Charlie harumphed, but accepted the device with steady hands. His first few rounds of therapy gave him such a case of vertigo that he had to grasp the handrails on the bed to provide him with a sense of stability. Still, it was a relief to have his only lifeline to the outside world back, and Charlie snugged the phone to his chest. My daughter, he mumbled. Then I know she'll be proud of you for all your hard work today, Mr. Mary. Charlie scoffed. Hard work? This isn't anything like what I'm used to doing. Yet here I am, embarrassed by my weakness and exhausted by the effort all at the same time. Matt flapped a hand in dismissal. There's no reason to be ashamed, sir. Your body needs some time to adapt to your new situation. Give yourself a chance, and I assure you it'll get easier. Son, I'm not worried about it getting easier. I'm more bothered by the possibility that I won't be able to work my farm anymore. It's a physical job, taking care of the trees, and I might be looking at the ugly side of 50, but I've never figured on giving it up. At least, not until now. Trees, huh? Yep, I got about 20 acres in orchards, but it's mostly Christmas trees. Oh, impressive. So let's get you back to it, Mr. Mary. You think it's possible, even with all this hardware? Well, we won't know until we try. Will we? When Matt arrived at the rehabilitation facility on Friday morning, he made a beeline for Charlie Mary's room. The man was stubbornly diligent about doing everything Matt requested, and that determination was being rewarded daily. You ready? Matt boomed when he strode into the patient's room. Beat you to it, Charlie gloated as Matt pressed through the curtain that provided privacy to his half of the room. Matt pumped his fist in celebration when he found his patient comfortably reclined instead of laying flat. Proud of you, Mr. Mary, but I'm going to do you one better today. Graying eyebrows flitted for Charlie's receding hairline, and he gave the lumbering giant the stink eye. Oh, really? And just what do you propose? Chapter 7. Ruth Mary totted several strands of fragrant greenery and followed the trio of women intent on adding some Christmas spirit to the bleak facade of the rehabilitation facility. As the other ladies sang carols, laughed, and decorated Charlie's window, Ruth mourned. After 5 weeks apart, she wasn't sure how she would bear another moment. But when the other happy holiday elves were finished with their mischief, she looked into Charlie's room and waved. Her husband appeared to be sleeping, but Ruth shouted through the window all the same. I love you, Brownie. That evening, as she prepared for bed, the melancholy woman tried to remember that all of the recent troubles would someday be a memory. And in the meantime, she would try to keep her head up. When the phone rang a split second later, Ruth was breathless. I was just thinking about you, she sighed, pleased to hear her husband's soothing voice on the other end. You'll never guess what I'm doing, Angel, Charlie cheerfully boasted. Ruth chuckled. Why do folks say that? If I can't guess, then why rub it in? Well, I see your point, the jolly man agreed. And I also see a beautiful Christmas display wrapped around my window. Oh, I'm so glad you can glimpse it from the bed. I wasn't sure how much you'd be able to see. Convinced the aide to open my privacy curtain so my roommate, Will, could also enjoy it. Plus, my physical therapist is sitting on the edge of the bed next to me. That way, he can appreciate it too. Charlie waited a minute for his wife's reply and then reiterated, "Sittin', Angel. Matt is sitting next to me." Okay. Chagrined by her lack of perception, Charlie listened to Matt's whispered suggestion and tried again. "I am sitting next to Matt on the edge of the bed, Ruth." Realization dawned, and Mrs. Mary squeaked. "What?" "He got me up on the side of the bed this morning for a few minutes, and Matt comes back every hour to help me up. But I'm wearing out now, so I'll give you a call back in a little while once I'm settled back in. Okay?" As the holiday season went into full swing, Charlie planted seeds of hope. "I will get out of this bed. I will stand again. I will go home," he repeatedly reminded himself. But mumbled prayers and crabby reminders to his heavenly Father cinched the injured man's resolve. "Please, God," he often pleaded, "I want to be whole again." Yet there was something else moving that Charlie couldn't comprehend. For all the big troubles laid at their doorstep, he and Ruth began to recognize the pattern of God's faithfulness, and it defied all the odds. A season of financial famine brought on by the lockdown was mitigated by an extraordinary opportunity. The Mary Hollow Tree Farm supplied the granary and Christmas tree to the world-renowned Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. Their despondent daughter died by her own hand, and a medical miracle restored the woman to their arms. But then grace called Stacy from the depths of despair and spiritually revived the woman so that her wit and joy filled their lives with gladness. Government restrictions curtailed their business during the busiest time of the year, which doused the livelihood of the Mary family and all of their vendors. But Stacy's organizational skills and creative problem-solving introduced new doors of opportunity, like an outdoor market and vendor demonstrations that brought folks from miles around. It all confounded Charlie, but inside his confusion, an assurance grew. God was not finished with him yet. And for that, Charlie determined to be eternally grateful. Chapter 8. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, his pastor patiently explained during their weekly call. "Yeah, I heard you the first time," Charlie grunted. "But I'm having a hard time getting past what is to see what might be," he explained. "So let me ask you, what's in your hand right now?" Charlie's face contorted as he looked into the eye of the camera. "My cell phone," he drawled as if it wasn't obvious. The minister chuckled. "You can see it. You can hold it, right?" Since the answer was self-evident, Charlie pulled a face but stayed quiet. That's what faith is, something you can literally grab onto and get your fingerprints all over. Stop feeding your fears and doubts, Charlie. Take a hold of that walker the physical therapist brought you and talk to it. "You want them to lock me up for good?" the flustered man joked, eyeing the metal contraption sitting next to his bed. "Because I only talk to that hunk of junk when it won't move fast enough." Jeremy Cassidy grinned at the man on the other end of the connection. "Even the little engine that could talk to himself, man. So get your hands on that walker and start mumbling, 'I think I can, I think I can.' And you will." The pastor could almost see when the light bulb went off in the other man's brain. That is the substance of things hoped for, Charlie. That's faith. "Not just wishful thinking, huh?" "Absolutely not," the minister retorted. "Doubt will get you nothing. Doesn't matter how many times you pray for a change. Until you believe you will receive what you're asking for, you're just filling the air with empty, meaningless words." I'm gonna walk. I'm gonna run, climb, bend, lift, and chop. And you're gonna get recycled into sinkers for my fishing line. Charlie grumbled at the clunky apparatus as Matt counted out each miserable step. "Don't give up, Mr. Mary. That's 9 steps. Give me one more. Just one more." A grimace crossed his face and Charlie wobbled. With grim determination, he straightened his cobbled-together spine and fixed his gaze on the far wall. After several seconds of mental aerobics, Charlie tested his weight on one foot and flexed the other. "Just believe," he reminded himself as he lifted his leg and shuffled forward. Matt gently nudged the back of his patient's knees with the edge of the wheelchair to let the exhausted man know he could sit. Then the therapist grinned when the stubborn old coot took 2 more steps before slowly lowering himself into the waiting conveyance. "Might as well make it an even dozen," Charlie huffed as he rocked back into the wheelchair with palpable relief. "That was great, Mr. Mary. You've made excellent progress in just a couple of weeks." "You think I got a chance of going back to work come spring?" Matt wasn't one for making promises. So much depended on a patient's willingness to follow through with their exercises and keep going when pain squelched their initiative. So he settled for, "You keep doing the work, and you'll keep seeing progress." Chapter 9. When Matt arrived at the rehabilitation facility on the Monday before Christmas, the head nurse cornered him on the way into the building. "Mrs. Mary called yesterday morning, and someone deliberately set their property on fire over the weekend. And Mr. Mary? Well, he's not handling it well." "I heard," Matt sighed. "My brother's one of the firefighters that responded to the call, and he's mighty upset as well. Mick and his fiancée planned to use the heated barn on the property for their wedding reception the day after Christmas." "Oh, how horrible. So many people impacted by some demented soul. And that's too bad about your brother's wedding. I know his fiancée, Shell. She decorated the cutest sugar cookies for my daughter's baby shower." A sheepish grin crossed Matt's face, followed by a deep flush. "Ah, yes. I seem to remember tasty rubber ducky cookies and some amazing blueberry cupcakes that looked like teddy bear faces." Saved from explaining that particular squabble when the nurse was called away, Matt hurried toward Mr. Mary's room. However, he paused at the door when he heard an unfamiliar woman's voice. "Is this a bad time?" he quietly asked when the couple went silent. "No. Come on in and meet my wife, Matt. The administrator gave Ruth special permission to visit so we can get some insurance paperwork signed." "I'm really sorry to hear about your place, folks. Mick told me what happened." Ruth Mary wiped her puffy eyes and offered a timid smile. "You know Shell's family?" "Well, Mick is my half-brother, and I've been staying up at their place." Oh dear," Mrs. Mary tittered. "You're the Cookie Monster?" Charlie gazed from one to the other in confusion. He wasn't sure there was anything left to laugh about in the world, but his wife's short-lived amusement lightened the atmosphere, and the weight lodged behind his breastbone dissolved a tiny bit. "Brownie, this is the fellow who keeps eating Shell out of house and home." Turning to the towering giant, Ruth wagged a finger at the embarrassed therapist. "Stop pilfering my baked goods, young man. I've got hordes of Christmas shoppers who need their sweet treats." Matt ducked his gaze, then glanced back up when the room went silent. A somber pall resumed its chokehold on the couple as the realization resettled in their minds. There was no more gift shop, no more customers, no more reason for his future sister-in-law to make all the delicate pastries and candies. Clearing his throat, Matt hoarsely acknowledged Mrs. Mary's request and tried to infuse his voice with a smidge of cheer. "Santa managed to round up an early Christmas present for you, sir. The stingy underwriters with your health insurance agreed to fund the lift chair rental for you, and the medical supply company will be delivering it today." "Well, that is good news," Charlie agreed, happy for anything that would get him out of the hospital bed. He had no idea where they'd managed to put the chair in the cramped room he shared with another resident. But Charlie was thankful all the same. "Well, I'll let you finish up, and I'll stop back a little later for your therapy exercises." Holding up her hand, Ruth halted the other man's departure. "Actually, I'd like to see what Brownie has been doing so I can help once he gets home. He doesn't say much about his time here, but I'm relieved to see him moving around." Matt smiled and waggled his brows at his patient. "What do you think, Mr. Mary? Ready to show your wife some of your new moves?" Chapter 10. Christmas carols and festivities faded into the long, gloomy days of winter, and Charlie's mood was as dark as it had ever been. While he was eternally grateful that his home had been saved from the fire, the loss of the outbuildings and several acres of Christmas trees devastated his hope that things might return to normal. "Cheer up, Dad," Stacy messaged one day in late January. And Charlie jolted. Dad? He thought. When had his wife's daughter accepted him so fully? Although he'd accepted Ruth's children and hoped to be a fixture in their future, none had allowed him to cultivate that closer relationship. But there it was in black and white, engraved for all posterity on his heart and in his mind. "I'm trying, Bunny," he sent back. "Keep praying for me, though. I'm feeling really put out with Mr. Wonderful right now." Within moments, Charlie's phone started to buzz. "Hey, you. Thought you were working today," he answered. "Shh, don't tell anyone," Stacy teased. "Otherwise, Mom will have me back in the kitchen for cooking lessons, and I don't think either of us feels like making another call to the fire department." Charlie winced at the reminder, but retorted, "Your mother did say something about pot roast gone awry." "Please, don't remind me," the girl dramatically gasped before reconnoitering. "So, Mom told you all about Mr. Wonderful?" And that simple question lifted his mood. "Who do you think introduced her?" The private nickname for Jesus might seem silly to some, but the Marys found it to be an apt description of the wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. "Oh, yeah, I remember Mom saying that, but when you mentioned it, well, it kind of gave me the guts to bring something up. So you want to hear what I'm thinking?" "Sure, fire away," Charlie said, then grunted at his own pun. "Just not in the kitchen," he corrected with an awkward laugh. "Geez, Dad, way to make a girl feel special." A spastic chuckle spluttered from Charlie as he shifted in the recliner. All right. All jokes aside, what's up?" "You and Mom went over the settlement from the insurance company yesterday, right?" "Yeah, I was surprised by their evaluation, in a pleasant way, to be sure, and I never expected them to be so quick about it." "Well, I've got some ideas about how we could make that money really work for you guys. Want to hear them?" So Charlie listened indulgently at first, and then he started to catch Stacy's vision for rebuilding the family business. When something stirred inside him, the melancholy man grasped the lifeline with both hands. "Seems like mighty big plans for a simple Christmas tree farm." "Maybe," Stacy conceded. "But how often do you get to dream big? You and Mom got a chance to build back better than before, and this business plan will require less physical labor than you're used to, just in case you've got to slow it down a bit in the future." After he hung up the call, Charlie grabbed a notepad. But before he could begin to organize his thoughts, he had to bow his head. "God, I don't know what you're doing here, but all of a sudden I'm catching glimpses of those promises you've made. You'll never leave me or forsake me. You provided a promise of good things, not evil things. And most of all, you've promised me a future and a hope. So even if I don't understand why everything's fallen apart, I believe you're doing something that'll deliver your goodness and mercy every day of my life. And all I can say," he choked, biting back a sob, "is thank you." Chapter 11. "You ready?" Matt asked, helping his client into the seat of an older Impala. The car was big and roomy, with adjustable seats to make it easy for Mr. Mary to get in and out of the vehicle. But Matt was still a little worried about the trip. Charlie's face was wreathed in smiles as he yanked the blasted face mask off and threw the thing onto the dash. "If you don't get me out of this place in quick order, I'm going to lose my ever-loving mind." After stowing away the wheelchair in the cavernous trunk, Matt slipped into the driver's seat and winked. "Sure you aren't going to miss this place?" he teased. The bright spring sunshine cast a brilliant glow across Charlie's face, and he luxuriated in the feel before turning to his new home health nurse. "Son, take me home. My wife's been counting the days, and my daughter's got all sorts of plans that need supervising. And if you don't get this old boat moving, I'm going to do it myself." Matt grinned and took off in a spurt of gravel. "Welcome home, Charlie," Stacy exuberantly called when her stepfather waved from the open window of the late-model sedan. The first flowers of spring poked impudently through the last of winter's snowy blanket, and pot-bellied robins flitted about in search of items to line their nests. "Oh, who is that?" Stacy stammered to her mother as a towering fellow stepped from the driver's side. Ruth bit back a grin and serenely answered, "You mean Matt? I've mentioned him, haven't I? He's Charlie's home health nurse." Interest sparked in Stacy's eyes. "Home?" she exclaimed. "This home? He's staying here?" "Well, that's the plan," Ruth slyly answered, a mysterious smile stretching her cheeks wide. Jabbing an elbow into Stacy's side, Ruth cryptically observed, "Perhaps he's a special delivery from Mr. Wonderful." "Mom!" "Seriously, honey? We've talked about this. Matt is Shell's brother-in-law, and he's the one who helped Charlie work through the plans for the fitness areas you want to build." "Shell? You mean this guy is the cookie monster she's always raving about?" "That poor man is never going to live down his munchies," Ruth tittered. "Just keep him out of the cafe when it reopens," Stacy hissed before her mother dashed off across the yard to greet her husband. Intrigued by the newcomer, Stacy followed behind and patiently waited until she could get close enough to give Charlie a one-armed hug. "There's my bunny," Charlie grinned, giving Stacy a cheerful wink. "Come meet Matt. He's going to keep me moving until this back of mine heals up." Matt blinked into the bright sunshine that nearly obliterated his view of the petite woman. "Matt Polans," he offered before raising his hand. "And yes, I'm the guy that scarfed down $50 worth of Rachel's baked goods at Thanksgiving. I also ate an entire pan of caramel rolls meant for your cafe shortly before Christmas. And my sister-in-law now has a lock on the butler's pantry, so I can't go marauding through her inventory when I need a midnight snack." The Mary snorted at his self-deprecating announcement, and Ruth assured him it wouldn't be a problem, slanting a glance at Stacy before saying, "No one here can cook." Chapter 12. The curvy pixie stood before him, arms akimbo. "What are you doing?" she demanded, looking up at him with her tawny eyes snapping. "Charlie asked me to take a look at the blueprints for the wellness center. He thought I might have a few ideas that would appeal to you." Glowering at the nosy man, Stacy cocked her head and mumbled, "I thought you already put in your 2 cents worth. That building is almost finished, and there isn't much wiggle room in my budget, so there won't be any overages or last-minute changes." "Not changes per se," Matt said. "More like an opportunity to pick up some great used equipment from a facility in Lansing that's going out of business. They have some fabulous echelon bikes, rowers, and treadmills. Plus, the interactive fitness mirrors are great for folks of all fitness levels." Stacy tapped 2 fingers against her lips as she thought. "I did some pretty extensive research, and I remember them as being top of the class. But it's a hefty investment when you consider the monthly membership fees for the interactive elements." "Mind if I take a look at the building? I mean, I know a lot of what you already planned is to help Mr. Mary recover, but there might be other ways to market your lodge when it's ready. Extra income, you know." "Well, now you're speaking my language. What are you thinking?" Charlie watched the pair go with a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. "Told you so," he chuckled to his wife. "I did not," she protested. "I told you." "Humph, I don't care whose idea it was, as long as I'm back up on my feet before this project gets any bigger." "That's why the wellness center was the first thing on Stacy's build it and they will come list. We were told the pool and the fitness room were things you would need to rebuild your strength." "Bah," Charlie teased. "You getting tired of providing my sponge baths already?" "My ex-husband, Peter, provided most of the details for the architect. When he built our home in Tennessee, he designed it to fit in with our century-old barn on the property. So he's the one that suggested we stick with the feel of the original buildings, at least on the outside," Stacy concluded as she gestured to the bank barn built into the small knoll. "With the river rock detail on the outside and the matching fireplace inside, it is rustic. But that's the appeal, right? To feel like you're part of a simpler time?" Matt watched the tiny dynamo as she flitted about with energetic grace, and he was exceptionally pleased when he realized that the pool on the barn's lower level was designed exactly as he'd suggested. "Your father will love getting in that pool, Miss Whitaker, and it'll help him feel secure as he relearns to move more naturally." "Hey, just call me Stacy, okay? That whole Miss Whitaker thing is kind of creepy, you know. Not only does it bring up some mighty uncomfortable memories, it also makes me think of my slightly loony mother-in-law," Stacy laughed. Matt grinned. "Whatever you say, ma'am. I'm just the hired help." "That might fly if you didn't catch me eating peanut butter from the jar with my fingers last night. And since you know what I look like in my Rocky and Bullwinkle jammies, I think we can just forget the Ms. this and Ma'am that. Deal?" His agreement was easy to come by, and Matt gave a knowing nod toward the woman. "If you insist." Chapter 13. Sour faces greeted him when Charlie rolled into the house late one May afternoon, and when his wife couldn't meet his eyes, the man was baffled. "What's going on, Angel?" Ruth dropped her head in her hands and let out a wail. "Derek did this. My son burned down our business and tried to burn me with it." Stupefied by the outrageous claim, Charlie struggled to his feet and staggered around the edge of the table so he could reach his distraught wife. "How can that be, Ruth? Think, he's been locked up for more than 6 months. Matt tried to slip away unnoticed, but Stacy waved him into a chair. "You might as well hear this too, as it's likely going to affect what's happening around here." "Ruth?" Charlie prompted again. "The investigator showed up shortly after you two went down to the wellness center for water therapy," Stacy began when her mother couldn't. "He received a copy of a letter addressed to Derek at the jail in Traverse City. And it's pretty plain that Derek had something to do with what happened here that night, all in an effort to make sure Mom had money for his bail." Each of the adults eyed each other in shocked disbelief, and a suffocating silence descended. "Tell them the rest," Ruth quietly sobbed. Huffing out a cleansing breath, Stacy turned to her stepfather with compassion in her eyes. "Information from the investigation will be provided to the insurance company, and once they examine the evidence, they may open their own inquiry if they believe the fire was started in an effort to defraud them." Charlie's whole body turned to stone. The contractors had finished the wellness center, tucked it into the acreage consumed by the blaze. Still, that was only the first step in Stacy's grand plan to add a retreat center to the property. And the next phase of construction, rebuilding the heated barns and the gift shop, was already underway. How would they pay for the expansion and repairs if the insurance company demanded repayment for their losses? Drawn into the conversation, despite his best intentions to remain silent, Matt echoed, "Insurance fraud? Why would they presume such a thing?" "If Ruth's son is responsible for this, the company may try to claim we benefited from his actions or presume that it was a coordinated event," Charlie growled. "And everything. I can't do this right now. I just can't," the overwhelmed man snapped before hobbling back to his wheelchair and rolling away. The family waited on pins and needles for the next few weeks as they watched the finishing touches appear inside the gift shop and cafe. And by the time they opened the outdoor market at the end of June, the Marys believed they were in the clear, at least until Matt pulled Stacy aside one Friday evening. "Can I talk with you in private?" the burly man asked as he gestured the woman aside. Stacy tucked flyaway strands of strawberry blonde hair behind her ears and looked up from browsing. "Could you set aside a bottle of the dandelion wine for me to sample? It might be something we'd like to stock in the gift shop if you're interested." She directed at one of the new merchants before turning to Matt. Waving her away from the circle of vendor stalls, The physical therapist led the curious lady to the back patio of the wellness center. The stamped concrete was smooth, although it looked like flagstone, and Stacy loved the luxury effect it added to the outdoor space. But Charlie's home health aide didn't look impressed with the beautiful outdoor space. In fact, the man was flushed and appeared angry. "What's wrong? Did something happen with Dad?" "No, Miss Whitaker. I lay this problem entirely at your feet," Matt grumbled. "Excuse me?" "My paycheck bounced. You told me things might change if the insurance company demanded restitution, but I figured you'd at least let me know if you couldn't afford my services anymore." Chapter 14. Stacy resisted the urge to slam the phone receiver back into the cradle, but she couldn't hold back the moisture in her eyes. After a good cry and a whispered, "Help," toward the ceiling, she went looking for her family. "What's going on?" Ruth exclaimed as soon as her daughter appeared in the living room. "Matt just carried his bags to his car." Glaring through the picture window at the obstinate man, Stacy stomped her foot in annoyance. "Dang that man! I told him I'd figure this out." Charlie withered in defeat. "So it's true? We can't afford his services anymore?" "Oh, the money's there. We just can't touch it, according to the manager at the bank. They've frozen your business and personal accounts until the issue with the insurance company is resolved," Stacy mumbled, acerbity lacing every word. "What issue?" Ruth snapped. "We haven't heard a word from the insurance company. Not one. The only new information we've received was from the district attorney in Traverse City about the charges they're bringing against Derek's girlfriend." "They're my next phone call," Stacy sighed. "But I wanted to explain what was going on so that grouchy giant out there wouldn't think we're trying to shortchange him." "Enough," Charlie howled. "I'm done. Let him go." "Just remember, we're here for Shell and her little one's special day," Ruth reminded as they stepped from the car. Stacy heaved a cleansing breath and nodded, her tawny eyes searching the expansive lawn for any sign of their friend. Set on a high bluff above Lake Superior, the partially restored Victorian home was massive and impressive. The brisk breezes off the water made the July heat bearable, and Stacy took in the scenery with practiced eyes. "Great place for a bed and breakfast," she whispered to her mother. Ruth shrugged and smoothed the lines of her dress. "Maybe when her children are grown." "It might take her husband that long to finish the repairs," Stacy giggled, recalling the poor woman's good-natured diatribe about the state of her home. "Although it is a wonder she still wants to run the cafe now that her kitchen here is finished. Did you see the pictures? It's gorgeous." The woman in question appeared with one of her twin boys and waved to the pair. "Please, take Matt back with you. He's moping around here like a dog with two legs, and if he snatches any more samples from my butler's pantry, I might have to nail the door shut every night." Despite the ongoing financial crisis that prompted the situation, Stacy giggled. "Charlie misses him too. Just not enough to go back to the rehabilitation center." Shell shifted the baby boy on her hip and glanced out toward the cold blue waters of the lake. Steeling her resolve, she turned her gaze back to her friends with a timid smile. "Ruth, you gave me a chance to get my baking and catering business started, and now you've made room for me in your new building. I owe your family more than I can ever explain." Swinging an arm around the younger woman's shoulders, Ruth drew Shell into a side hug. "I'm happy you think so, but honestly, it's your apple fritters that opened those doors," she replied with a teasing smirk. "I beg to differ," Stacy piped up. "It's the cream cheese Danish all the way. No doubt about it." "Whatever it is, Mick and I can't thank you enough," Shell chuckled. "But we wondered if something like that might work for Matt." Cocking her head, Stacy wondered out loud. "How so?" "Well, you guys offered me the cafe space to work from, and you share in my profits instead of collecting rent. So what if you did something like that with Matt? He could use the wellness center to do rehabilitative training, and in exchange, he could keep working with Charlie." Ruth's mouth popped open in surprise. "He would do that?" "Well, Mick seems to think so." Shell replied, spotting her husband and waving him over to join the discussion. And it might be worth talking to Matt about it. Chapter 15. Charlie pulled a face when his physical therapist popped up the following morning. "What are you doing here, Matty? I still don't have the money to pay you." "Well, your daughter made me an offer I couldn't refuse." The big fellow replied with a wink, hoping to relieve any awkwardness over the reason he'd left in the first place. "Huh," Charlie grunted. "Makes no difference either way. We weren't making any progress anyhow, so you can turn right around and head back to your brother's place." Crouching down so he was eye level with the disgruntled man, Matt matter-of-factly pointed out, "You might not be ready for any marathons, but you were rebuilding your core strength and putting in the effort needed to get back on your feet. Have you given up on the idea of getting back out into your fields?" 8 months, Charlie snapped. "I've been doing everything the doctors and therapists have asked of me, and it's doing no good. There's constant pain and weakness, and it just gets worse every day. So why bother anymore, Matty? Why bother?" he asked, shaking his head in irritation. Matt rocked back on his haunches and waited for his patient to calm. He'd spent enough time with the Marys to understand they operated in a slightly different fashion. The whole church scene had never been his thing, but he understood enough to realize that it helped Charlie and his family deal with some pretty extraordinary setbacks. "So what did Stacy promise you?" Charlie finally mumbled. "Time and space in the wellness center to do rehabilitative training for other folks." "And that's going to make this worthwhile?" Charlie asked, gesturing toward his uncooperative body. "Well, your daughter also said she's figured out how to make a halfway decent pot roast. So there's always that." Charlie chuckled, since Stacy's cooking was a running joke in his home. Then he rocked one hand back and forth a little, effectively miming so-so. "Ready to try again?" the therapist prompted. "Your wife was pretty insistent that I get you out from underfoot," he teased. "Well, she isn't here, so what she don't know won't hurt her." Matt grinned before he recalled where Mrs. Mary had gone and why. He sobered and stood. As he scanned the large front yard and the outbuildings that sat in the distance, there was still a good deal of obvious fire damage. "Any more word from the insurance company?" he quietly asked when he considered all that was at stake. Rolling down the temporary ramp they'd installed, Charlie urged the electric wheelchair forward. "Nope," he answered. "Not the way you mean. Our attorney said the fraud investigator is waiting on the outcome of Derek's trial this week before they decide how to proceed." "Well, looks like there's still plenty going on, though. The outdoor vendor stalls and weekend farmers market are doing well, and Shell is doing a fabulous job with the cafe, so there's a little income flowing. And since you've been introduced to Stacy, you know how determined that little gal is, right?" That brought a snort of laughter from Matt. "I think stubborn is the word you're looking for, sir." A little of Charlie's gloom fell away as he laughed. "As a gold-darn mule," he agreed. Chapter 16. Alone in his bedroom that night, Charlie waited for his wife to call. Ruth's trip to Traverse City, so she could be on hand for her son's trial, was still a bone of contention between them. And, if he was honest with himself, it grated on his nerves. She'd chosen to cater to Derek's needs instead of staying home where she belonged. So rather than his wife's gentle hands helping him ready for bed, he was reliant on Matt again. And Charlie made his feelings on the matter well known to the Almighty. Loudly. However, the still, small voice that whispered to his heart challenged the grumbling man, and Charlie glared at the ceiling. "How much more do you expect from me?" he growled. "Trust me." "It would be easier to trust you if you made good on your promises," Charlie snapped to the heavens. "You promise healing and provision, but I don't see it. Evil stepped in and burned down everything I worked for. An incompetent shit destroyed my back. And I'm still waiting for you to show up to do something about it. Though he will slay me, yet will I trust him." "Well, you might as well. Just get it over with, because obviously you're done with me, and I have no choice in the matter. I'd rather be dead than stuck in this broken body for another 20 or 30 years. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Believing is seeing. Charlie's jaw snapped closed and his spirit contracted. Substance? He recalled an earlier conversation with Pastor Cassidy. Faith is something you can literally grab onto and get your fingerprints all over. Stop feeding your fears and doubts, the man had admonished. Annoyed with himself, Charlie realized he'd let that knowledge go by the wayside as he'd sunk into depression. But the heaviness that weighed him down was as debilitating as the pain in his body. Now what? He whispered to the ceiling. In quietness and trust is your strength. My strength is gone. I'm so tired, God. The idea of moving one more step, doing one more lap in the pool, surviving one more day with this pain, I just can't. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Charlie grunted at the unwelcome hint. Lord, I believe what you say, but I've got to admit, I feel like something the cat dragged in. So I'd be mighty grateful for whatever fortitude you can provide, because I just can't do this on my own. I will never leave you or forsake you. Moisture clouded the wearied man's vision, and he heaved a hearty sigh. All right, we'll do this your way. But please, I'm begging you, don't leave me like this. I can't take much more, and I need to see some progress in the right direction. Deal? Call upon me in the day of trouble. I will deliver you. Fine, but mark this day on your calendar, because I'm calling on you, and I expect deliverance, not delays. When Ruth called the following Friday, she was subdued but hopeful. The jury found Derek not guilty, Brownie. Although he'd had conversations with the woman who set the fire, he never made any insinuations that would have prompted her to act. Charlie wilted in his wheelchair. You think that'll satisfy the fraud investigator? It should. The woman admitted she acted independently, believing it was the only way Derek could raise bail. But there is something else we need to discuss. I'm afraid to ask, the mystified man replied. The woman, Samantha, has 4 children and 1 on the way. The oldest 3 belong to other men, but Christopher and the baby she's carrying belong to Derek. Chapter 17. Stacy bolted toward the minivan when it pulled into the driveway that led to the ranch-style house. Not only was her ex-husband's father on board, but so were her new nieces and nephews, a circumstance that overjoyed Stacy's soul. Paul, she happily greeted, bouncing into the man's arms. I'm so glad you're here. I know whatever you decide to build is going to be extraordinary. Charlie held out his hand and welcomed the carpenter, but he and Matt backed away when the sliding door to the minivan opened and 2 little girls with strawberry blonde hair poked their heads out. Can I pick an apple? The oldest child questioned as she glanced back down the long driveway lined with fruit trees. Well, they won't be ready for another month or so, Stacy advised, gesturing to the girls. But we can go check on the cherry trees a little later. The 2 little faces scrunched up, and Stacy giggled. They taste really good in pie. Me too, someone else squeaked from inside the van, and Ruth hopped out, trying to shush everyone all at once. Don't wake Christopher, the harried grandmother implored. That boy is just like his father, irritable at being constrained. That evening, after the children were tucked in, Ruth plopped onto the sofa next to her daughter and huffed out a weary breath. I don't remember you 3 being such a handful, she admitted. Paul laughed and winked at the women. Seems like you ought to give Mary a call. She could bring you up to speed on all the ways a certain little miss can find to run you ragged. Intrigued, Stacy couldn't help but ask. And what does Peter think of having children underfoot? Her ex-husband was a quiet man who'd never said much, especially when it came to the idea of raising a family together. Oh, he's a sucker for those big blue eyes. Girl's got that boy of mine wrapped around her tiny little finger. Miffed by the thought of another woman's child wiggling her way into Peter's heart, Stacy frowned. Although their divorce had been finalized a year earlier, the situation still tugged at her heartstrings sometimes. Eager to know more about the project he'd been hired for, Paul short-circuited his daughter-in-law's growing discontent by asking, "So, what did you decide?" Unreasonably unnerved by the mention of Stacy's previous marriage, Matt was the first to speak. "We walked the area originally slated for the lodge, and the idea of individual cottages is much better. It'll give folks some privacy while keeping them close to other amenities." Focusing on the revived construction plans, Charlie chimed in. "Our girl has some pretty ambitious ideas, but so far, she's been spot on. We're hosting our first wedding reception next weekend, and if that ain't the darndest thing. But I'll admit, I'm a whole lot more comfortable building a few cabins to start and then growing off from there if things take off." We've got our funding back, so we could do the lodge. But I like Peter's idea for the cabins better," Stacy admitted. "He's always had the creative vision to fuse form and function. His drawings for rustic cottages, an old-fashioned covered bridge, and a simple chapel blend in with the surroundings so much better than some hulking 3-story hotel." Chapter 18. "What are you thinking about?" Ruth whispered into the darkness. Charlie carefully maneuvered his body until he was flipped over, facing his wife. "I gotta be more careful when I ask God to fix things," he answered, still somewhat befuddled by the sudden shakeup in his world. "Remind me again why we have 4 children staying with us instead of just 1. "Elizabeth, Adeline, and Averly loved their baby brother. I couldn't take Christopher and leave them in that crowded foster home, Brownie." The man grunted and mumbled. "I'm not sure I appreciate Mr. Wonderful's sense of humor." Ruth's eyebrows bunched, and she squinched up her nose as she tried to make sense of that pronouncement. Okay." Laying a hand along his wife's hip, Charlie drew the woman closer and nuzzled her neck. "When I bought this place 35 years ago, I planned to find me a good woman and raise a house full of kids. Lots of big, strong boys to help with the work, and a whole passel of sweet little girls to follow in their mama's footsteps. I didn't expect them to all show up at once, and I never figured I'd be old and gray before they got here." Ruth snuggled into Charlie's chest and drew feather-soft lines along his arms. "They say life begins at 40, she tittered. "Yeah, but I'm more than a decade past that, so I'm still kind of trying to absorb it all. And since we'll be responsible for these kids for the rest of their childhood, I'm feeling like the joke is on me. How am I supposed to raise a family from an electric wheelchair?" "Same way you would with 2 good legs under you, I guess," Ruth answered with a slight shrug. "I just keep thinking about the last time we prayed with Pastor Cassidy. He kept repeating that we were on the cusp of something new and exciting, and we couldn't see it or fathom what it might be, could we?" "I guess I figured it had something to do with Stacy's plans for the farm." "And maybe it does, Brownie. But what if that wheelchair is meant to shift your focus from raising trees to raising a family? What if all our prayers for the salvation of our children are staring at us across the breakfast table tomorrow?" That thought stopped Charlie in his tracks, and he quietly stammered. "Well, then I guess we better thank the good Lord for all of his blessings and figure out where we're going to put them all." We hope you've enjoyed this production of Forever Faithful, part of the Hope for the Holidays series, Book 6. Written by Michele Pollock Dalton. Read for you by Rick Barr. Published by Barr 26 Publishing, LLC. If you've enjoyed this audiobook, please visit shopbar26.com, where you can find other titles in this series and many more. We look forward to sharing more great stories with you. Author copyright 2021 by Michele Pollock Dalton. Production copyright 2023 by Barr 26 Publishing, LLC.